Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis. Happy Wednesday again. It's 11 o'clock. I just got done with these wiretaps, y'all, and I'm not going to lie. I totally left the last one for another day because it's 40 minutes long and everybody has said you can't hear a thing on it. And my ears are just done. But I got you covered with the rest of it. Real quick, thank you to Rhonda for the donation. I appreciate you. All right, real quick music fact. Who was the first successful all-girl band? That goes to the Go-Go's. Their debut album, Beauty and the Beat, hit the top of the Billboard charts in the early 80s. I love the Go-Go's. All right, so listening to the progression on these wiretaps has been very, very interesting because you sort of go from a little cocky, kind of feeling invincible, to full-on panic by the last one I listened to. And the thing that I've noticed too is Jake got a little bit more nervous towards the end as well. I wondered if I would ever kind of notice any difference in him, and I did just a bit. But Angela and George were full on just panic mode by the end. And I'm going to tell you what I've learned today, too. Let me tell you something. Angela Wagner is 50 Shades of Cray. She is out to lunch. She is just, it is so amazing to see the different acts between these wiretaps and this really soft-spoken, quiet as a mouse, person that we've seen in the courtroom for the last few years now. Just insane. And then I was thinking about George and Jake. Some people I've read today, and it's okay to have different emotions. They're all, they're all guilty of really, really terrible 8 people. It's always hard for me to know where to point, but behind me, these human beings are not on this earth anymore because of these 4 people. And to hear them on these wiretaps just playing the victim and acting like they're the ones being done wrong is kind of nauseating. But then you think about George and Jake, and for me, I was surprised a little bit about Jake and how he stood his ground, and then how he seems sort of protective over Beth. It's kind of one of those things where you wonder if George and Jake, and this is, if you're new, I'm very fascinated by nature versus nurture. Is it in our DNA to be evil, or is it something we're taught? And you think about Jake and George both as fathers. We could say on one hand, they're terrible fathers because look at what they did. And that's totally it. But at the same time, had they been raised by loving and nurturing parents who set them on the right path, on the flip side, it's crazy to think if you took that passion and made it a good thing, like they really had the potential to be amazing fathers. And the tragedy really lies with Billy and Angela, and the travesty really of what they did to their boys from such a young age, very young, to make them into who they became. And that's the murderer of these people back here. So it's just a thought I had. I do think about things like that a lot when I'm covering cases, is how could it have gone different? And here it's really easy to see. All right. So this recording, we're going to jump back in. This is from the truck. I'm going to tell you, let me tell you something. It took me like 3 hours to get through this one. So this is from May 31st, 2018. Is Jake and George talk about Beth and the kids. Now, it is really hard to hear at times. George does not know the meaning of an inside voice. He reminds me of it's 1111. It's angel numbers, by the way, make a wish. So he reminds me of the drill sergeant in Full Metal Jacket and how he talks, except if he had a much higher pitched soprano voice. He yells the entire time, by the way. So George says, she said she touched her inappropriately and you believe Beth over her. What kind of person would do that to their child and believe somebody else? Sophie said that she lied for the sole purpose. She thought you were going to leave. You were already gone after you had that talk with her. And then there's some religious talk, and I can't hear it. And Jake recites some scripture, which I finally figured it out was Matthew 21:21. Jesus answered and said unto them, verily I say unto you, if ye have faith and doubt not, and you shall not only do this which is done to the fig tree, but also if ye shall say unto this mountain, be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, it shall be done. George says it don't work that way anymore. And Jake says, are you walking in his path? And George said, your daughter's probably being molested, and you believe a freaking insert a word here that rhymes with more over her. I'm just not saying that word. I don't like that word. Jake says, what? You will not insult my wife. And George says, I will insult your wife. Jake says, no, you won't. There are times during these conversations where they're like, no, you don't. Yes, I do. No, you don't. It's almost like you expect to see them like start slapping each other from like the passenger and the driver's seat. George says, and George's favorite word is frickin', by the way. You're too frickin' blind to see. I think he says the demon she's putting on you. And Jake says, no, I have not. George says, you swore up and down you'd never let a woman come between you and Suds. Jake says, and she is not. And George says, and never let anyone push their way in between. And Jake says, wrong. George says, you've been putting more time and more freaking effort into Beth and putting Suds on the back burner. Jake says, no, I'm not. You don't know what you're talking about. George says, when you walked in the house, you hugged Beth first. You didn't even hug Suds first. You hugged her first. You had been gone for a week. Jake says, yeah, she got there first. George says, Jake, you should say, no, ma'am, that's my daughter. I'm hugging my daughter first. I haven't seen her in a week. Back before her, you'd be gone to work 8 hours. You'd come in, you would ignore me, you'd ignore mom, you'd ignore dad. You'd go straight to Suds and spend 2 to 3 hours with Sophie alone. Don't tell me you ain't put her on the back burner. You don't think it hurts how you run to give Beth a hug first? It's just deliberately. He says, something I think about Sophie praying for him. Deliberately, you cut Suds off. Now we can just see if mom witnesses that one. Jake says something here, and I really tried hard to see what he was saying. I even texted Big E. I was like, here, listen to this. Something about her destroying a relationship. And then George says something like, specifically mine and yours, or something like that. He said, I don't trust mine. I know better. And I think he's talking about Tabitha, like his ex. Jake says something about the devil and what he can't do. And George says he has a lot more power on this earth than what you give him credit for. And George says, George says, God's all seeing and all knowing, right? And Jake says, that's true. George says, I think, why did he get cast into hell before he took anyone with him or something like that? And Jake said, God knew exactly what he was doing. He says, you don't have the faith, George. George said he tried to walk straight and narrow, and Jake said, you tried for the wrong reasons. Remember, he is Pastor Wagner in jail, or Preacher Jake, or something like that. George said, I didn't say any bad words. I didn't do anything wrong. I said all my prayers. Not one prayer tied to me. And Jake said, what kind of prayer was it? Selfish? Was it all about you? And I think George says Bullvine. George says something about if Sophie didn't lie and didn't say it didn't happen, you wouldn't come back. George says, what if they arrest us and put us in handcuffs and put them all in the electric chair? Would you want Beth raising Suds? And Jake says that he would not want Beth to have Sophia if he got arrested, because she hasn't been around long enough to know how he wants things done as far as raising her. But he does trust her. So the next recording, June 1st, 11:40, George talks about Sophia. He actually threatens to rat Jake out to BCI. He said every time he tries to do something, Jake's the one ratting him out. And he also says that as far as jealousy, Beth is the most jealous little girl he's ever seen. It really bothers me when men call women little girls. I don't know why. So the next recording, June 2nd, 11:58, George to Angela using Jake's phone. They talk about the kids and the wife, Beth. Angela says, when you get home, we got to have a family meeting. He says, about what? And she says, about all of us. Angela says, I love you. This is kind of the start to me of the panic between Angela and George. We don't hear anything from Billy on these at all, but definitely the two of them are the most nervous. Angela says, listen to me. We're going to do a what if. No questions now, though. George says, nobody wants to listen to me. He says they need to expose BCI and the cops for being crooked about what they've done to them. And then he references Montana saying, and what they did to the kids up there. And if you don't do this before they do something to us, you're going to be screwed if you don't attack first. When they attack you, they will scream, you're making this up to get out of what they're trying to get you for. If you attack first, it makes them look like the bad guys trying to get themselves out of the pickle they put themselves in. Angela says, hold on. And then she says, get in here right now. George says, if the lawyer doesn't answer his phone Monday morning, I'm going to knock down his frickin' door office. Angela said he told me he was out of the country, and George says, I don't care. I'll find that mother fricker. I paid him $2,000. I want a reply. And Angela said, I'll let you know when I hear something. George said he should come back and go on the frickin' offensive. If you don't fight back, you will not stand a chance. Angela says, whatever, George. I can't deal with any more of you and the caffeine, okay? I can't. George says, they're not going to do their scare tactics on me. I will wreck their frickin' world. With or without John's help. If you don't get a hold of him by Monday, I'm finding a different attorney and I'm going on the frickin' offensive on these mother frickers. Angela says, that's awesome because we don't have no money like we did before. Angela asked, did you get any money out of that Ford Explorer that Chris sold? And George says, yeah. She says, well, how much? And he said, a couple of $100. Why? And she said, well, they went out shopping again. George lists a bunch of car parts and talks about going to the scrapyard. And she says, you got to make room for Bolvine. Angela says, other than that, George, it's hot, it's nasty. You can't take him every single time you're running junk with Chris. He smokes all the time. So George says that he'll find something to do with Bolvine. George says he'll get $3,000 profit. I believe this is from that insurance settlement where the truck was intentionally wrecked from that payout. Angela says, well, they went shopping with Mom yesterday and came back with a truckload of stuff. And George says he knows what Chris owes him and he has it all written down. And by the way, y'all, I'm sorry. When I'm reading this, like it comes out very Southern because I've been listening to it for over 12 hours now. It's just kind of like seared on my brain. Next recording, June 2nd, 12:50. George and Angela talk about law enforcement. And George talks about BCI using scare tactics. Angela says, listen to me. You think that smiley guy that's on Topics that posted that stuff, you think that's one of them, which is interesting because I've had people ask me so I found the Topics message board on the Wayback Machine. There are literally 6,000 pages and over 100,000 replies on this case from day one. But I've had a lot of people before these recordings came out ask me, tell me who you think Smiley is. So I believe it became obvious to more than the Wagners that maybe Scheider was incognito on Topics. So George says everything they did is illegal to us. The whole world doesn't know they're about to be indicted and be investigated themselves for being crooked and paid off by some drug ring. Angela says the whole world knows they're dirty. And George says, if you blow it up on Fox News, DeWine, Reader, they're all involved in it. They're at the top. And what they did at the border, drugging the children, threatening to make Sophie watch, and you blow all that up, and it'll be a devastating blow. They won't recover from it. These people are so delusional. Like what the world? Oh my gosh, what the heck? Where does this come from? I mean, these people make up things and then they just convince themselves of it, which is why we're here, by the way. But George says, if you get the main people in Washington and the FBI on your side against them mother frickers, they will crumble. You take the head off the snake, the whole body dies. He said, every time you and Dad got in trouble with the law, it's because someone caved. He says, I'm not caving and I ain't crumbling. I'm going on the offensive. I'll cripple them mother frickers and they won't recover. And Angela says, stop, George. Angela says, I got to chase Bolvine and Sophie down. So that's the end of that one. On June the 3rd, outgoing text, George to Angela is a photo of Beth's journal. June 6, 2018, 11:44, George to Angela about Tabitha and how long it will be for the abandonment. In the first episode today, we talked about, I think it was June 7th, was going to be a year that they were thinking they could file for abandonment and get full custody of Bullvine forever. And you could tell Angela literally just wants off the phone. And that's one dynamic I've noticed today is she's more than happy really to talk to Jake. But with George, she's always trying to get off the phone. But she don't have favorites, y'all. She said they're putting a swing set together. Angela said Tabby hasn't paid anything for Vine in a year. The last year, she hasn't contacted him personally. And the attorney asked her when she last contacted Bullvine, and Angela said, we met, but she talked to George the whole time. The lawyer asked Angela if Tabby brought a photo for Vine to have when she's not there. And George says she hasn't FaceTimed or anything. He mentions he offered to fly her to Alaska. She said no. Of course, she said on the stand she didn't want to end up dead. So yeah, Tabby's on top of it and smart. He said she can't contest anything you do in court because when the judge sees she hasn't done anything, she won't get anything. Sophia, get off. Get off that before you tear it up. George says he will tell her that you've done nothing for him and you can contact him when he's older. That's what George says he will tell Tabitha when he gets full custody. So this next recording is June the 8th, 7:15. Jake and George talk about Special Agent Scheider. It's really quick. George says, yeah, Ryan, I know you're listening to this. That was the end of that. So then we go to June 9th, 8:16. Jake and Angela talk about Beth getting arrested and going to jail, and there's chaos and panic in this call, y'all. My hair, I could have fluffed it a little bit before I got on YouTube. Angela says, we got to figure something out because I'm just going to tell you something. We're running on borrowed time. I have the feeling we're absolutely running on borrowed time. That man has a vengeance for us. I don't know why, but I got to make sure everything is okay. So they talk about a prenup or something. They're really worried Beth's going to get something if they get arrested since her and Jake are still married. Angela says the other thing you can do is hire a private investigator. He can find out everything about her in a short period of time. I have a phone number I can call Monday morning. No offense. Let's see. This is Jake and Angela. I hope I said that. And so Jake sounds, she said, I'm sorry. She said, as quickly as you jumped into that, it wouldn't hurt you to know her background. And Jake sounds really irritated and mad. And he says, you go ahead and do whatever you want. Angela says, I don't want to make you mad, Jake. We've already got the world mad at us. I don't want you mad at me. I want you safe. Jake says he understands and you can do whatever floats your boat. He said, I have my faith in God. You do whatever you want. Angela says, I know God is keeping us safe. I don't have faith in humankind. Their free will. It's almost like she's speaking as if she's above humans. You said that night she came up with answers that are too quick and too perfect. And Jake says, but I do the same thing. He said, when I did that with BCI, they said I was lying. Angela asks about if he's caught her in any lies other than their wedding night. And he says, no. Jake asked if she had ever written anything in her journal about BCI, and she said no. So if you remember way back when we went through the journals, when Beth was on the stand, she had written that really long entry about Angela and how terrible she was. And she said that, she could turn her in and get her a life sentence, but it wouldn't be true. So she couldn't do it. But this is kind of what they're referring to. Jake says, you're saying you didn't write a letter saying you were going to turn mom in for something she didn't do. And she said she didn't write it to BCI. It was her being angry. She said, it could be horrible that I could. Angela said, okay. And she's kind of laughing sarcastically. Jake and George are back and forth. I mean, because George is in the car. Jake says, I could do it, but it wouldn't be true. And Angela says, yes, it does. She said Beth could be an honest person who has had a bad life and is trying to fit in, or every time something comes up. Then you hear George saying something about she could be a witness to that. Angela says, what is he saying? And Jake says, George said when we get arrested, she could say we wished she was Hannah. Angela says, oh my gosh, don't even talk about that. That's wrong wording. Just don't talk. You don't remember. You don't talk. You miss everybody dearly. That they'll twist what we say. So she tells them, you remember, you don't talk. You miss everybody dearly. They'll twist what we say. Good grief, evil woman. Angela says, I will let the attorney talk. I won't say nothing. And Jake is telling George not to talk. Jake said, you do your thing, I do my thing. And Angela says, no, no, no. If I wasn't married to your dad and didn't have Sophie and Vine, I wouldn't do life in prison. I will take the electric chair and die. If they frame us, I'm not sitting in prison. She said, you won't ever see the kids. They won't bring them to prison. You'll have to fight she said, I think she said the R word every day. Jake said, I'll take my life sentence. They won't keep me there forever. That just means I got 60 years to get out. And Angela says, it's a fighting battle every day in those places. And now she knows it is. So the one thing too, that this is a theory that I have. So on the stand, defense attorney Parker asked Jake if he thought life in prison was a punishment, and he said no. I really do have a theory that Jake getting away from his mom and his dad, and maybe not George. I think maybe Jake, not that I'm happy if he's found himself or is free of whatever, but maybe it says something that he's happier in prison than he was towards the end with his mom. Because every time I've seen him in court, he never looks like George. George looks mad. He looks mad at the world. Angela looks sad. Billy just looks ticked off. Jake just looks happy. So I really just have this theory that Jake is okay in prison. Like, he'll do his time, but I'm sure he would rather be free. He said that he wanted them all to go home, but still, I think it says a little something there. Jake says, I don't want to do that. I love you, Mom, but you got no balls. Jake asked for George what he would do, and George said he would take the electric chair too, and he said he would take an officer with him on his way out. His attorneys, you guys, just were sort of like, oh my God. A few times they were like, oh my God. But then what was funny too is defense attorney Nash has really funny facial expressions. So like Angela will say something or Jake will say something, and it is funny. And like you'll see him try not to laugh. So I had a good time watching Nash today because like he was trying not to laugh when I was literally here laughing. Jake says, you take the easy way out. You do what you got to do. I'll get out one way or another. Angela says, you got to quit talking about this stuff on the phone. George says, Ryan, I will kill you. And Angela says, George, shut up. Oh my God, tell him to get off the caffeine. He's going to run. Okay. She meant to say ruin. Okay. She said, he going to run the weekend. That's all he does is run the weekend. Bullvine waits all week for him to get home. Jake says, you need a happy face when you get there for Bullvine. Be happy. Angela says, Jake, I don't want you to say anything. Jake says, I'm not saying a word. You do what you want, and I want no part of it. Angela says, that's fine. That's fine. That's perfectly fine. I need to talk to you when you get home. I don't want to talk on cell phones. I don't want them idiots to hear everything I say. So we jump to June 12th, 2018. This is George and Angela, which is just, combined chaos with these two. George asks if Beth is at the house, and he said Beth was asking him a bunch of questions he didn't want to answer on the phone. I think he's referring to Jake. He says, I'm telling you, Mom, there's something up with her. And Angela said Beth had a fit today, saying Jake didn't need her because he had me. And she said, he might not need you for sex, but he can pay for that. And Angela said she told her that's not true. In other words, he needs you. George thinks she's thinking of leaving Jake, and Angela said she actually talked about it this morning because Sophie tore up the wedding photo and said she didn't want her around. She said these women she trusted up there in Alaska said it was going to be easy because Sophie was over 3 and her mother was already dead, and she would latch on to Beth and they would live a happy little life and a happy little home forever. Jake had told Beth to help move some gravel or something. She said, Mom's mowing my yard. I'm moving the gravel. She came out and asked if she needed to clean Bullvine's toys. And then she asked if she could go to the library. She's blaming me for everything. So at this point, George is like in full on freak out mode. He's like, tell Mama I need her to stay with you. Angela said, what happened, Bullvine? Let's get a Band-Aid. George said, I want to witness with you at all times. She said, okay, that's fine, George. I'll take care of it. Let me tell you something. What'd she say? He said, I can read Jake's body language. Angela said, she's going to leave him. She's going to blame Sophia. George talks about Jake not needing to get her on the bank account and get a car because he thinks that's the only reason she's not leaving right now. And Angela said if he gets arrested and her name is on it, Sophia gets nothing. When there couldn't be another person around, George told his mother to go in the room, lock the door, and keep that thing with you. I don't trust that girl. I'm not sure what thing he's talking about. I thought initially the thing was Beth, but I think maybe thing might be reference to a gun. George is panicking hardcore, y'all. He is like the captain of the crazy train on this one. And he said, do that. I want someone with you all waking hours. She says, okay, George, okay, I got it. Into the call. June 12th, Jake to Angela using Beth's phone, and they talk about Tabitha. Angela says Tabby is using her old Facebook when they were together and to ask George if he remembers the password for that page. Jake says, okay. And Angela says, I don't care what time it is. Have him call me. He says, okay. So June 13th, George to Angela returning for family emergency. Angela and Billy actually were heard talking before the call connects. And Angela says, texting a picture of Jake's hand holding a firearm. So then Jake answers the phone George answers the phone. Angela says, hey, what did you need? And George says, I'm going to unload and tell them we have a family emergency. Angela said her mom said they showed a picture of a man's hand. Then George tells about the text that Agent Scheider sent. You remember the one with the silencer, the one with Jake's hand, and it said, I need you to talk to me as soon as possible about this. Angela said the picture was Jake's hand holding the gun, and then I don't know. They're talking over each other. And then Angela saying, Mom said, she said they were ready to lock stuff down. And then she said, lock stuff down with who? And she told him to get off her property. Angela says, I want to know if one of those pictures had Jake's hand with a gun with a silencer. George said, they're making crap up. So June 13th, 12:29, Angela tells George not to say anything on the phone. Angela says, this is real important. I just want to tell you real quick, son, don't talk about nothing on your phones. Don't say a word about anything. If they arrest you, don't sign anything. Don't even tell them your name. If they tell you to sign something because they want your wallet, don't sign it. George says, I don't think they're going to arrest me. Angela says, tell Jake. And George said, everything they've shown is on Jake. George says, hello, like 10 times. Apparently the call disconnected, or probably knowing Angela, she hung up on him. June 14th, 10:12, Jake calls R&L Trucking Company about a family emergency. He said, I need to somehow get back to Wilmington for a family emergency. So this guy's like, yeah, well, let me forward you to the manager. He's the one that makes those decisions. So Jake says, we're headed to Dallas right now. He says he has a family emergency and he can take the load to Dallas and take one back to Wilmington. But he said, if it's a family emergency, we'll work with you, but we'll need to keep your partner on the road. And Jake said, yeah, that's the problem. My partner is my brother and it's a family emergency. So he said, they'll do what they can to get him back. June 14th, George and Angela talk about Beth. Angela thinks Beth has poisoned their ice cubes, y'all. Billy was there and smelled them too. That ice tasted like that nasty, disgusting medicine again. Your dad took a taste and about puked. He wouldn't even drink it. Then they talk about how to keep Beth from getting anything from the family just because she's Jake's wife. June 14th, Jake and George talk about the wish list on Jake's phone, which Jake testified on the stand that wasn't a wish list. They actually owned all those guns. George said, don't make no more wish lists, Jakes. And Jake said, I don't think I'm going to. And George said, you and your freaking wish list. So the last one, y'all, June 14th, George and Angela. George asked Angela if they showed Beth the picture of Jake holding the gun. They were at Flying W Farms when this happened. And Frederica said, that's not Jake's hand. And Beth said, yeah, it is. Beth said, that's Jake's thumb, all right. Frederica said, you think that's your husband's hand? And George said, she's full of crap. Angela said, I know that. All right. Better hope to God they don't call her to the stand. So that was it, y'all. We went through it. We made it. Um, it's really funny when she talks about, "We gotta get him off that caffeine." So anyways, that's it. I will try to make the best of that last 40-minute call tomorrow, but my ears are like, "Girl, we're done." And my body's like, "Girl, it's bedtime." Gonna do it again in the morning. They're still not finished with wiretaps. I found that out. So we'll do this again tomorrow. All right. Happy, happy, joy, joy. Another day closer to justice for the rodents. All right. See you tomorrow.